I woke up to a whisper that wasn't mine, and it was coming from inside my room.
Disclaimer: the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.
Over mud, grass, and gravel I ran side by side with the rest, dozens upon dozens of forest green silhouettes emerging from the forest in a screaming tide. Bullets whined through the air like hornets, an enemy mortar round landed within the ranks of 2nd Platoon a few hundred yards to my left, and agonized wails of pain began to echo through the night. I caught sight of a few bodies fly into the air from it, and watched a severed arm tumble past me, still grasping a rifle. Burned gunpowder stung my nose, dirt gritted between my teeth from the particles that still rained from the air, and adrenaline surged in my veins like fluid lightning. My throat hurt from yelling, but a part of me was too afraid to stop. As if it somehow gave me arcane protection from the storm of lead that hissed through the air, bam 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 bam, a burst of yellow fire shot from the shadows in front of our advance, and I glimpsed one of the concrete machine gun bunkers lit up by the flash, dirt kicked up around my boots, and one of my boys crumpled to the ground, dark gushes of crimson flowing from holes in his arms, neck, and face. Oh no, medic! One of the others stopped to try and drag his wounded comrade to safety. We need a medic up. Another burst caught him in the left side, and I watched the young soldier's skull split under the pressed steel helmet, red blood gushing out where his eye had once been. The heavy machine gun rounds tore through his chest rig like butter, and sprayed thin mists of red as they exited, all with the speed of a shutter-stop camera. He fell to the mud, boots still twitching, his green uniform pockmarked with ragged holes. I flung myself behind a broken stump, machine gun bullets riddling it with hateful fury, and waved my men onward through the chaos. Cover! Get to cover! Move! Wild-eyed, they crawled through the maze of toppled logs, shredded thorn bushes, and smoking grass. Each sought to find various positions that shielded them from the onslaught, and fired back as best they could. However, with each passing second my worst fears became realized. We were pinned down, even amidst the rubble of our bombardment. The machine gun bunker held us at bay, the other platoons making fast headway in their sectors due to the successful destruction of the other two emplacements. While our artillery had pummeled the enemy with all they had, they obviously had done their best to avoid shelling the fuel tanks and warehouses within the compound, and this one had survived. We were close, so close I could hear the ELSA men calling for more ammunition, for medics, and pleading over their radios for air support that wouldn't come in time, but a grenadier squad from inside the fort could ruin our day. There's no time to radio the howitzers. Not when we're this close. That bunker needs to disappear, fast. With shaking hands, I pawed at my chest rig and yanked a gray cylindrical grenade from its pouch. Welded from scrap components by our armorers, it was crude, filled with black powder, ammonium nitrate, and covered with old framing nails, but it was the best we could do without better supplies. I would have one shot at this, and the odds of me catching a bullet in my arm were high, but it could buy us enough time to close with the bunker. Adrenaline hot in my veins, I jerked the small metal pin from the fuse and hurled it with all my might. Frag out! Kawump, bits of wire from the already tattered fence scattered in the wind. Dirt clouded into the sky, and a plume of white smoke covered everything. The machine gun nest stumbled in its fire, the gunners stunned by the concussive force, and excitement fought with disbelief to choke me. I can't believe that actually worked. On all fours, I scrambled across the debris, over fallen barbed wire, shattered tree limbs, and concrete, to jam the muzzle of my Type 9 into the narrow cement firing slit. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat, holding down the trigger. I emptied my magazine into the bunker, dust flying as the shots ricocheted inside to bounce around like pinballs. Men screamed icy howls of pain that I knew too well, and I slid down into a huddle to fumble for another grenade. This one, my last one, was painted yellow, a more potent device that one of the militia men had created from a recipe he developed before the breach. It had two safety pins, one to stop the other just in case, and the cold metal slid in my sweaty fingers like glass in a pool. Don't drop it, don't drop it, don't drop it. The last pin came free, the metal spool flew off with a clang, and I pushed the grenade through a gap in the firing slot made by our shelling, heart ramming itself against my ribs. I curled into a ball on the mud, and clapped both grimy palms to my ears. Boom. Wood splinters flew, chunks of concrete blasted across the dead leaves beside my scrunched up face. And bits of stone danced across my helmet with a sound like rain on a tin roof. Something nipped at my right earlobe just beneath my helmet, but I shook it off and drew a deep gulp of smoky-infused air, forth, on me. I slapped another magazine into my weapon, racked the charging handle, and ducked through a gap in the HESCO barriers next to the bunker. With my gun held at the ready, I pivoted into the narrow doorway at the back of the squat bunker and clicked the light on my flashlight. Wreathed in acrid gun smoke, bloody corpses lay scattered inside, 6 limp bodies of men sprawled where they'd been manning their positions. Most were half-dressed, some even barefoot, their armored vests thrown on over bare chests and t-shirts. Many were in their mid to late 30s, though there were a sprinkling of younger and older ones in the mix, none so young as me. Judging by the disarray of their clothing and gear, I figured we'd taken them completely by surprise. Gotta keep moving. clear. I called over my shoulder and slunk back into the courtyard as the rest of my platoon streamed through the gap in the walls. Snap, a bullet hit the fender of a parked cargo truck to my left, and I bent low out of reflex, office building, right side window. Sergeant McPherson let off a few rounds from his rifle and waved the other troops forward, as if in response, a small jet of red flame shot out from the office rooftop. And something whistled through the air in a fast streak. Boom, pebbles hummed through the atmosphere. The rocket-propelled grenade tore the HESCO barriers apart several yards to my left, and I shielded my face with one free hand. Suppressive fire. Working alongside my desperate platoon, I dodged between the various parked ELSA vehicles to close the distance on the office building, firing my submachine gun in tandem with the others so they could follow on. Across the open area to our left, members of our force hefted themselves over the HESCO barriers, and still more swarmed in from the right. Enemy fire began to lessen as more positions fell and coalition troops stormed the first warehouse from the ground. But we were closest to the office building, and the ELSA soldiers in there seemed to have no intentions of giving up. Gravel seemed to float under my boots, and bounding to the side of the cinderblock office building, I crept up to a set of doors on the side, my uniform sticking to my back in nervous sweat. This is Sparrow 1 Actual, approaching Building 1. I screamed into my headset, unsure if they could hear me over the constant roar of battle, and waited for the hail of lead to stop on the other side of the wall. 4th is making entry. Do not shoot us, I say again, do not shoot the first floor of the office building. Turning back to the line of wide-eyed faces behind me, I motioned to the door. Okay, Charlie, you frag it, Jenkins you're second in, Campbell on 4th. I'll take point. Under her dark mask of camouflage paint, Lucille's face twisted into a frown. I could, go. I reloaded my Type 9, and in we went. The sheet metal door swung open with a crash, and Sergeant McPherson lobbed a baseball-shaped hand grenade into the foyer. Smash, smoke and debris coughed from the open doors, and on the heels of the explosion I threw myself into the abyss, weapon light on, finger pressed to the cold steel of the trigger. For a split second, I thought back to the first time I'd cleared a house under duress, with Chris and Jamie in the Southlands. I'd been the inexperienced greenhorn then, the newbie, the pale-faced, wide-eyed girl from Kentucky who didn't know where she was. Now I was the one leading the charge into the unknown, and it felt strange, as if the old Hannah had never existed at all or was some kind of fairy tale dream I'd made up in my mind. This was my reality now, this was my world, the only place that made sense anymore. A narrow hallway confronted me, the floor cluttered with broken chunks of cinder block and shattered plastic from the ceiling lights. So many rounds had gone through the building that the wall looked like a honeycomb, and the scent of salty burned gunpowder almost choked me for how thick it was in the interior. Toward the end of the hall, I paused at a T-intersection and spun to wave my non-firing hand at Charlie in preset hand signals we'd worked on for hours. You take half left, I go right. Sweep and clear. The others were so close I could feel their breath on the back of my neck, their boot tips grazing my heels. I'd spent days with them, trained over and over again in Ark River on close quarters combat, doing room-clearing drills and breaching techniques, but never in actual combat. True, we'd used it on the scrounging mission for machinery, but that had been in abandoned buildings with the only potential threats being mutants. The men waiting for us in the dark were professionals. Hardened warfighters who had killed people twice as fierce as us, with far more experience and infinitely better equipment. Compared to them, we were skinny vagrants in our homemade uniforms, with improvised weapons and charcoal face paint, like flies biting the spider. There's no way we're walking out of here. We should have just stayed far off and pounded the building with mortars. Gritting my teeth, I focused on rolling my feet heel to toe the way Jamie had taught me, angling myself on the corners as Chris said to, and pushed the discomforting thoughts from my head. None of that mattered now. We were here, this was happening, and if I wanted to live for another 5 minutes, that meant fighting tooth and claw. A large area opened up in the gloom to reveal a former cubicle space with metal bunks lined up against the wall. These were interspersed with duffel bags, rucksacks, assault packs, and footlockers, evidence of the building's conversion into a makeshift barracks. Sleeping bags and blankets were in a jumble everywhere, boots toppled over where they hadn't been pulled on in time, and shards of broken glass littered the floor from the numerous shot-out windows. My golden irises focused, taking in more light than a normal person's could have, and in the emerging grayness of the unlit room, human shapes poked up from overturned bedsteads. Got you. I breathed and squeezed the icy trigger. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat. A stream of 9mm rounds blazed through the shadows, and one of the men tumbled backward. In an instant, the room exploded with muzzle flashes, and to my right, Jenkins went down in a slump. Back, back, back. I snagged my fingers in the strap of his chest rig, and Lucille took the other to stagger down the hallway, the air hissing around our ears. We ran face-first into Sergeant McPherson and the rest of the platoon coming up the hall, and the already chaotic situation turned into a shuffle-run gaggle of confusion. There were so many gunshots echoing inside the claustrophobic building that I could barely hear anything else, in between my ears ringing with shrill irritation. It felt like concussive tom-toms banging against my skull, and I had to blink fiercely to keep the flying dust out of my eyes. I want fire superiority. Handing Jenkins off to another platoon mate, I resorted to shoving people into position, my pulse roaring. I expected Elsa's soldiers to come rushing up the bullet-filled hallway we'd just come from at any moment. Everything you have down that hallway. Pour it on M. They didn't need my encouragement to cut loose, and those stationed on the corners leaned around to empty their weapons down the hall as fast as they could pull the trigger, those with automatics dumping rounds until their barrels turned dusky purple. It didn't matter whether we could see or not, I'd long since turned my weapon light off and none of the others dared to activate theirs. One of the NCOs had the sense to throw a couple red road flares down each hall that bathed the entire grisly scene in bloody rays of dancing light. At this point we shot at flashes, fired in the direction of the enemy, blasted through walls hoping to kill something on the other side. Any skill or technique had gone out the window, it was all a slugfest now, a competition to see who would run out of blood and ammo first. Wham! An explosion seemed to go off right in front of me, the shockwave threw me into the opposite wall, and new screams of pain filled the air with the same density as the smoke from the grenade. Sparrow 1 actual, this is Rhino 1 actual, what's your status, over? Gasping for air, I blinked hard at the grime in my eyes and limped to the intersection to poke the barrel of my submachine gun around the right side corner. Illuminated by the flares, a dark figure emerged out of the dark, shrouded with a Kevlar helmet and night vision goggles, with the glassy lens of a reflex sight against his eye. Brat-tat-tat, the gun jumped in my hand, but the last round caught my attacker under his chin, and the Elsa soldier toppled backward as his comrades scurried for cover. Sparrow 1 actual, be advised, Building 1 is still exchanging heavy fire with our units, are you inside? I say again, Sparrow 1 actual, are you inside the office building? Wincing at how my face burned, a hot trickle across my right cheek, I slumped behind the eroding corner to replace my magazine and squinted through the smoke. 3 more of my platoon lay on the floor, the others picking themselves up to resume the fight, but more rifle flashes came from the left side hall. In a cold shudder, I realized the enemy was working to surround our intersection on 2 sides. They would force us out of the building, and once we were back in the open, their guys on the 2nd floor would cut us to pieces. Sparrow 1 actual, where the hell are you? Talk to me, or I'll come get you myself. Answer, damn it. Charlie. I grabbed my platoon sergeant by the arm as he braced himself against the wall, lead still shrieking back and forth down the halls. I need grenades. As many as you can, hurry. I've got a big one here. One of the boys offered me a grenade with a wooden handle about a foot long attached to a repurposed ham tin. It had been designed for destroying light armored vehicles by our armory, packed with the same material as our yellow grenades, but with a concave bit of copper inside to act as an armor-piercing projectile. In this case, I figured it would do wonders for a cement block wall. Clearing his lungs first, Charlie snatched the device, lunged to the right side corner, and yanked the pull cord in the handle. At my signal, he stepped into the open for a brief second and lobbed it around the corner. Charge out. Kaboom! The entire building shook, graphite dust clogged my nose anew, and bits of ceiling tile rained down in an itchy powdery tide. Like at the bunker, the Elsa fire hesitated. And I dragged myself around the corner in a dead run. We were down the hall in seconds, spraying bullets at nothing and everything. Lucille appeared at my elbow and threw a smaller grenade of her own toward a door at the far end of the sleeping quarters, the blast almost catching us for how close we were. Each step took me over bodies, some dead, some not, and those that still lived we shot without mercy in a blind panic to keep them down. Spent casings littered the floor, along with bits of debris, the air almost unbreathable for how much drywall dust hung in it. I nearly twisted my ankle on a discarded rifle, my boot slipped on a crimson puddle of sticky blood, and only by some miracle did I right myself at the blasted maw of the second doorway. Clear. Throat raw, I spat the words down the hall to the intersection. Right side's good. Another blast echoed from the left, and more gunfire snarled in response. Left side secure. Charlie's raspy voice echoed back to me through the radio headset after a few minutes. Fresh gunfire rang out on the other side of the doorway beside me, a stairwell there that led to the 2nd floor. Beyond the twisted remains of the stairwell door, I caught shouts of rage, fear, and tension from the men above. Boots thundered on the other side of the ceiling, the last of the garrison preparing to do battle right on top of us. Elsa hadn't expected to be pushed back, and to be fair, we hadn't expected to get this far. But now they were charging the stairs, rolling grenades down the metal steps before them like stones. Boom, boom, boom. Driven back with burning lungs and ringing ears, I joined my platoon mates in an improvised barricade not far from the door, ready to meet anyone who came down with a hail of bullets. In scurrying teams of desperation, I worked with whoever showed up at my side to drag the wounded to safety, all while the enemy descended right into the teeth of our fusillade. They were mere feet away now, so close I could see the muzzles of rifles angled around the stairwell door to fire blind rounds at us. My adrenaline gave way to rising dread, and when I took a moment to stop for breath, I discovered I was down to 2 magazines and had 5 additional wounded men on the floor. We need reinforcements, time now, Rhino 1 actual, this is Sparrow 1 actual. Out of breath, I keyed my mic while 2 of my light machine gunners set up their ancient Browning to deter any Elsa soldier who tried to bound out of the stairwell door. We're in the first floor of Building 1, we need immediate, right here. A hand closed over my shoulder, and I almost jumped out of my skin. I turned and there he was, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, face swabbed with charcoal paint like mine, and a fresh dent in Chris's steel helmet. At least 20 additional men crowded into the barricade beside my own exhausted troops. Our forces pouring in from outside as engines rumbled closer, and heavy machine guns sang into the night. The armored trucks had arrived, and a flamethrower team advanced to douse the stairwell with a long jet of orange and red fire, forcing the enemy back. High shrieks of burning men cut through the night, their skin melting like candles in an oven, and I gagged on the stench of cooking human flesh. There's too many up there. I jabbed my finger at the stairwell, the doorframe ringed with bullet holes, scorch marks, and shrapnel gouges. Chris pressed the mic button on his radio headset and shouted with everything he had over the cacophony of our struggle. Eagle 3, this is Rhino 1 actual. I need you to hit the roof of the office building, how copy, over? I only heard the reply due to my enhanced ears refusing to succumb to the onslaught of tinnitus, and the fact that my radio headset was turned up all the way. This is Eagle 3, we read you Rhino 1 actual, just to clarify, are there friendly units inside the building, over? Bam 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 bam, Chris yanked me to my knees, the 2 of us huddling behind the ramshackle barricade of wall lockers, bedsteads, and rubble as one last enemy. Machine gunner unloaded his 240 through the wall in our direction. Affirmative, we're in the first floor, enemies on the second. I need you to hit the roof with 1 salvo, I say again, 1 salvo. Can you do that? Can do, but it's going to be danger close. The voice on the radio crackled through, do it. Chris stuck his own M4 over the side of the barricade to help the others return fire, and I did the same, our spent casings mingling underfoot in a smoking tide. Eagle 3 copies all. Came the reply through our headset speakers. For guns in effect, for rounds, 1 salvo. Heads down Rhino 1 actual, this is going to get hot. Down. I reached for Lucille to drag her to the floor alongside Chris and I. Everyone in the room throwing themselves to the ground at once. Everyone down. Cover. Kawam, if the anti-armor grenade had shaken the building, the howitzer rounds threatened to bring it all down around my ears, and every block rattled in its place. Glass whirled in a blizzard around my head, I bounced off the floor as if I were on a trampoline and landed again with a painful jolt atop the stock of my Type 9. Clouds of dust so thick even flashlights and flares wouldn't cut through clogged the air, and I fought to gulp anything like oxygen, the dirt like sandpaper in my mouth. It's going to bury us. An iron grip hauled me up, and Chris advanced on the stairwell door, his rifle spitting fire like a comet's tail in the darkness. Let's go, up the sitars, move, move, move. Towing Lucille behind me with one hand, I leapt up the shrapnel-covered steps with a horde of coalition fighters, and into the broken remnants of the second story. Much of the roof had caved in, the smoke thick enough to blind me from anything further than a few yards, but it didn't matter. Like the rest, I fired at every shadow that moved, shot every limp body on the floor regardless of whether it breathed, and never stopped until I almost ran face-first into opposite stairwell doorframe. Clear. The word echoed throughout the building as well as outside, and at long last, the guns fell silent. After the chaos of battle, the ringing in my ears grew louder. Despite the advanced mutation in my body doing its best to tamp it down. Cold sweat stuck the wool uniform to my back under the straps of my chest rig, and a few wet leaves clung to my neck from the forest. The sharp stinging in my right earlobe refused to go away, my whole body itched, and all 4 limbs trembled like leaves in a rainstorm. Just as soon as the fight had started, it ended, and something about that made the entire experience feel even more surreal. 4th platoon, sound off. I coughed through my radio to avoid vomiting due to the sludge of dusty mucus caught in my throat, and clawed the canteen from my war belt. The toll for our side had been surprisingly light. 10 killed, and 12 wounded of the overall force in exchange for eliminating 43 enemy combatants. It seemed most of the 120 estimated garrison had been assigned elsewhere, and since we attacked with overwhelming force, they hadn't stood a chance. Still, not a single Elsa man surrendered, and as we set about securing the tiny fortress, runners were sent to a radio observation post in our rear area with the news, so as to relay it to the other units. Medics scurried forth, my men were set to help load supplies with the others, and the gates were open so the captured vehicles could be driven away. It almost seemed unfair to go right to hard labor after what we'd just been through. But I knew we couldn't lounge around here. In this war, lazy soldiers were dead ones. At some point, I took a break from loading the trucks to climb back into the ruined office building. With the dust settled, I used my flashlight to sift through the second floor, and found it littered with plastic trays, disposable silverware, and overturned paper cups. Fresh food had been smeared by stampeding feet, and my stomach twisted in mourning at the ruined eggs, squashed bacon, and pulverized toast. They were having breakfast. No wonder they were slow on the response. Man, look at that French toast. I wonder how hard it would be to just wipe the dirt off. You're bleeding. Not far behind me. Chris leaned on the bullet-riddled man door of the stairwell, his M4 slung onto one shoulder. I am? Confused, I brought a hand to my face, only for it to come away sticky and red. Your ear. Crossing the room to me, Chris tugged a small medical wipe from his warbet and dabbed at my right earlobe, which sent a fresh twinge of pain through it. Caught a bit of shrapnel or something out there. Hope you weren't planning on wearing earrings for a while. I rolled my eyes at that but bit my lip at how the alcohol pad stung. Better an ear than anything else. I lost a few boys coming up the slope. Machine guns cut them down. Beneath his mask of charcoal, Chris's features slumped. And he jerked his thumb toward the doorway. Me too. Gonna have a hell of a time writing notes to send back to all their families at Ark River. The ones that still have families, anyway. He stepped back from taping a small bit of gauze to my ear, and Chris held me by the shoulders in a tender squeeze. Are you sure you're okay? Are you? Now that I had time to take in his appearance, it was clear the fight hadn't spared Chris any more than it had me. His green uniform was rust-colored in places where blood had stained it, there were fresh rips in his trousers, the black coal dust on his face joined by mud, soot, and concrete dust. The helmet sat loose atop his mousy hair, its chin strap hanging free. A definite groove in the steel where a bullet had come far too close to caving Chris's skull in. It struck me how easily I could have lost him had he taken one step to the left instead of the right, paused one instant too long, pulled his trigger 1 nanosecond too late. I didn't want him to be here, didn't want him to be head ranger if it meant going through this every time we went to battle, but knew with helpless certainty that Chris could never live with himself if he stayed behind. No one had told me love would be this way, a self-inflicted torture that never seemed to end, heartbreak that you craved too much to leave, desire for something that had the capacity to destroy you with all the ferocity of a howitzer shell. I'm fine. I choked out, and dared to let my hands slide over his arms, shoulders, and chest to probe for unseen wounds. You need a bath. And a laundromat. At that, his blue eyes glowed, and Chris's white teeth shone in a weary, yet amused laugh that warmed me to my core. Come on, there's something I wanted you to see. Might not be a shower or washing machine, but it's the next best thing. He led me to one of the massive warehouses, through another wrecked man door and into the dark interior of the structure. Even in the dark, I could sense how cavernous the building was, the echoes of our footsteps resounding high above, the shadows long in the dim red glow of a few emergency exit signs. Boxes and crates were stacked along the walls in veritable mounds, bound together with steel straps to keep their contents from spilling over. It smelled of engine grease and gun oil, reminding me of the mechanical garage in New Wilderness, and I winced at the pang of homesickness I felt for a place that no longer existed. Everything good is being destroyed, one place after the other. Soon all we'll have left is a few ugly ruins and graves. Will it all be worth it then? Check it out. Clicking on his weapon light, Chris swept the bright white beam over the nearest objects and broke me from my glum reverie. A stunned breath caught in my throat, and I gaped at the hulking shapes of heavy armored vehicles with big knobby tires. Each bore a squarish turret atop their backs equipped with a long cannon, machine guns and grenade launchers bolted into the hulls of the beasts as well. Faint blocky letters spray painted on one side read M1117-90, and they'd been painted a dull shade of gray just like the other Elsa war vehicles. No scars of battle were evident on the armored hides of the machines, no chips or cracks in the bulletproof glass. These were brand new, and they were all ours. A grin slowly worked its way over my dirty face, and I ran my hand over the cold armor of the thing to let out a long, slow whistle. Holy cow! This thing probably cost more than my parents' mortgage. You thinking what I'm thinking? Chris smiled beside me, his eyes twinkling as he nodded at the armored cars. I'd say it's time for an upgrade, don't you?
Until next time, subscribe to stay up to date with all updates. No screamers or shocking moments, only comfort and safety. Bye.